One of the barriers, one of the main barriers is to do with people getting started generally. So we already know that if people aren't getting started, we need to give them some basic tools like gospel presentations, like sharing their story. But that's not the main barrier when it comes to teams. That's the main barrier when it comes to activating new people, new churches, new church leaders, new Christians. With the teams, one of the barriers is that many teams are going out there and doing abundant gospel sowing, but they're not getting to person of peace or house of peace. That's one of the big barriers.
How many have experienced that, by the way? Yourself, ministries around you, abundant gospel sowing, but not establishing groups, not finding persons of peace. Good.
Okay, so this is one of the main barriers, not just in the UK, but in other countries across Europe. For example, the team working in Lille in France, they'd already had the multiplication training. They'd been to Athens. They'd had Jeff Sundell. They'd had the T4T training, at least 3 or 4 touches, and they also had other practitioners on the ground doing stuff. And one of the main ways of connecting with people was that they would set up a coffee table where there's an underpass where you come off the tube or train, and there's crowds of people that go through. And as they serve coffee, they offer to pray for people, which is a Field 2 thing, and they share their story, and they share a gospel presentation. I think they were sharing at that stage the two hands, left hand gospel, and then they would be moving into more the 2 kingdoms or the 3 circles. And when I met them, I think it was 2014, they said that even though they've been doing this for 3 years, for some reason they were not getting a breakthrough in finding people of peace, even though that's what they were looking for, even though that's what they were doing. And when I asked them questions, they said, well, every single weekend we're out here doing this, and they're not giving up, and they believe that at some stage there's going to be a breakthrough. And I thought, well, that doesn't seem right to me, because wherever we've been, we found houses and people of peace, potential ones, actually within an hour or 2 hours of going out. But I did know that when I started doing more abundant evangelism and gospeling back in 2005, for 2 years I was doing that. I didn't find people of peace because I didn't really know what I was looking for properly. So then it took me about another 1.5 years to really crack that. So even though it's simple now, it was a kind of paradigm and practice issue that took 1.5 years to crack, but then once you crack it, it's very easy moving forward. So I want to just talk about some of the key paradigm issues in moving from doing abundant gospel sowing to crowds or to passing people, or generally to getting to find people of peace where you actually gospel into a group of people that person of peace is the leader or the facilitator amongst. So one thing that we found, and some of these things are counterintuitive, and I'm open that we can have debate and questions on this, but we have hardly ever, if I'm going to be really strong, I'd say never, because I've never found, but if you may be a strong evangelist, maybe sometimes you might, as a strong evangelistic gift, I've never found houses of peace in terms of churches started with somebody that's a passing person. So we've just gone to a busy place, like find wherever the busiest people is, and just like go and gospel. I've never ever seen any team get to church doing that, ever. Now maybe if you're a really strong, more evangelistic gift, somehow maybe your gift could carry you through that, but I've never seen that happen. But, and there's a number of reasons. One is that even though these guys, for example, on the underpass had seen lots of people, they did pray prayers with people, they did pray for people for healing, they did share their story. When they then took the numbers or telephone numbers of those people and said, right, where can we connect again? And they say, yeah, we'll meet next week in a cafe or somewhere. They'd turn up to go to that cafe and the person wouldn't be there. And then they'd try and ring them and then they would get no answer, or it'd be like something like you ring and they'd be like, who is it? And then when they realise it's like a bit embarrassing and they try and put the phone down. And they'd been doing that for 3 years. Now they did say that they had 1 or 2 guys where they did actually end up meeting them. So out of loads that cancelled and stuff. But then they ended up in a kind of one-to-one, what became basically a one-to-one discipling relationship with somebody who actually wasn't a person of peace for like a year or a year and a half, and then that fizzled out. But then within 3 days, we found 17 potential people of peace who said, come back to my house in the space of 3 days. And I'll tell you why. We switched strategy completely. So where they were working in this underpass system, nearby there was a block of flats. And when I went there, I said, you know, what specific people groups or places have you guys been praying into and looking to say, right, we want to see a movement started in this place or this people group? And they had, basically they mentioned all the areas that they served these coffees in. So they did it in about, I think it was about 6 or 7 locations across the city where they did it. I said, well, have you prayer walked round those areas? Not just the passing area, but where people are located residentially, where people are living, or where there's people who always go in the same pub or the same cafe or the same regular rhythm where you go there and the same group's there. You go away, you come back the next time and you see the same group.
Right.
Have you seen that and located that? And they hadn't really. They weren't thinking in that kind of way. They were thinking, if we just do abundant gospel sowing, we'll get to personal peace and this. From a perspective of seeing movement started with churches, I don't know why we would do that. So, would you like to know more? Who else do you know that might be interested in this? Because we're trying to test whether they're, in my mind, a person of peace is somebody with an oikos.
Do you know?
So, would you like to know more? Who else do you know that might be interested in this? So, for example, if we just shared, let's say 3 circles, and then it's like, who else do you know that might be interested in meeting up to explore more of this, or more of Jesus, or look at the Bible together, or whatever way you would say that? Third question, where can we meet you? So it's on their terms and their turf, and that's where we're more likely to get into their oikos, their group. Because if I say, you know, let's meet in this pub or something, it's probably outside of their context, somewhere where I'm comfortable, not they're comfortable. And we want it to be somewhere where the people they know are likely to gather. And the fourth question is just a simple logistics, like what time and where. Do it then, don't do it afterwards. And set it by your watch. Like, you know, within the next 24, 48 hours, not I'll meet you in 1 month or something like that. Because then that's extremely hard to follow. Obviously, if they're available then, you want to go with them there and then. Let's go now somewhere and sit down and talk more and gather some people. But if they're not able to do that, then within the next 24 hours. Now, that's basically what we did in Lille, and that's why we found 17 people who said to come back. Now, I'm not saying they're people of peace, they're potential. Because, you know, when you then go back, they might still not say. But the difference is, when you go back to knock on that door, you know who's behind it. You're not trying to kind of chase up random people. You know what you look. You know where you're going. So you can easily then go through those 17 people to get from the yellow lights to the green lights very easily, as opposed to trying to chase up all of these people that are really not people of peace. They're just people that might be open or not open to the gospel. I don't equate someone open to the gospel as a person of peace. But that's just, maybe that's me. A person of peace is when you enter a town or village, you're searching for a worthy person who invites you into their household, their oikos, their social circle. You know, there might be passing people like somebody who Jesus touched and healed. It doesn't make them a person of peace. So when you go into crowds, you're doing that kind of passing thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're finding any people of peace. Right. So I did write these articles on this, and the reason was because these were the issues that no matter how many people I've met that had heard multiplication training, they just weren't getting this issue of what really is a person of peace in practice, what actually do you need to do to find them? And so I wrote these kind of things to basically try and sometimes it does make me a bit sad if we're still dealing with that issue. We really want to be pushing forward in this issue. So Lille is an example. The same was with the guys in Paris, the same with the guys in Rome, the same with almost every guy that I've met who's going out there doing abundant sowing. They're doing that, but they're not doing it with a strategic lens to groups. Another way would be when you walk down a town, into a town or wherever you're going, when you were going, are you thinking, I'm just going to talk to lots of individuals, which is okay, or are you thinking, I'm going to talk to the crowd, anybody, or are you thinking, where are the groups?
Yeah.
Because if you're already going to target a group, then that group's going to then continue to be a church. You're not having to do the work of trying to get a group. So if I'm walking down the town, you know, the one that's just 2 minutes up the road, you can go there easy and say, right, let's look in this pub window. Okay, there's a group of people meeting there. When I come back next week, is the same group meeting there? If they are, then I would target that with abundant gospel sowing.
Right.
Because then if they're open, you've got a ready-made group.
Right.
You're not having to figure out how to get a group, you're not having to figure out where to meet these individuals, try and coach them to get a group. The groups are already there.
Right.
So that's how we've always found houses of peace, by viewing things from that lens. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Yeah, when you say you've never seen passers-by finding, going to the passers-by finding a house of peace, are you meaning all kind of street work, all,
No.
the park, that sort of thing?
No, I'm saying it strongly to try and counterbalance. If we says we're not really getting many groups going, then we need to say why. And the common answer for those who are not getting groups going would be, we just need to sow more.
Yeah.
And I'd say, okay, I'm not sure that's the thing. Oh, we just basically dig deeper holes than we already have to try and get something that we're not getting. Mm-hmm. If we're not getting groups, it may be something to do with the way that we see group formation.
Yeah.
And so they're just coming from a different lens and saying, look, we have found that one, there's a common pattern of teams not getting that are more on we're just going to individuals or scattering.
Yeah.
So that's one common pattern. And then the other thing is that from our experience, we have found lasting groups or groups forming easier when you're finding the house of peace. Yeah. And by house, it could be that it's physically a house, you've knocked on the door, so that's a very easy way to do that. Or the household is the group. So in obviously Britain, it's sports clubs, it's hairdressers where everybody knows each other, it's arts places where the same kind of guys hang out, it's cafes, it's the young people who hang out in the same park and they're all together, it's the gang members, it's wherever there is groups that already exist as groups. So if you go up to a group and say, guys, can I tell you a story? And they already hang out there, then if they're open, you can go back there the next day and find the same group.
Right.
It's a lot easier.
Right.
It saves a lot of hassle and a lot of work.
Right.
And then you can the work then is making the disciples of those and multiplying. There's a big shift when it comes to, one, how do we actually get started? Number two, how do we actually connect with people? As people get over that barrier, then it would be how to share the gospel with people. And then the next thing would be, how do you move to group? And that's the barrier that we are seeing as a common barrier in the European context. Then the next barrier would be, how to get from group to church. How to get from just church meeting to multiplying churches of disciples. So it's like, if we overcome the barrier of that everybody in the UK and Europe can get to group easily, then we can actually tackle the next issues, which is in the next 2 years get into multiplying churches in the harvest. So we don't have to make the same mistakes that countless teams have already made in trying to approach a certain paradigm and practice, hoping that will get to group, but actually there's a shift in the way that things are done that's necessary to get to group. So that paradigm is something that we can crack easily so that we can really move to the next phase. So another way of doing that is everything to do with these fields is, am I looking for groups when I'm entering? Am I thinking group? When we share the gospel, are we also looking to share the gospel with groups as well as individuals? Groups that are already there? Are we looking to train groups, not just the disciple that then we're hoping that they will then get a group? When it's church, obviously we're thinking about group anyway. But why not be thinking about group all the way back here, field one?
Yeah.
And thinking about that in every stage, and then you've already actually got the group. And that's basically what you're saying as well. You work backwards like that as well, where you're thinking group. So you're thinking pray and then group. But it's like, that's another way of approaching things where you get groups straight away. But it's the same process, it's just you're thinking that all the way through. Another aspect to do with the fields that I found very helpful for people is to think about these fields and think about what kind of gifting is helpful in each field. So for example, field 1, a prophetic lens is very helpful. Field 2, an evangelistic lens is really helpful. Field 3, a teaching lens is really helpful. Field 4, a shepherd lens is very helpful. And the whole process is an apostolic movement or process. So the point being that depending on what your first and secondary natural inclination is, that's probably what you will place most emphasis on when you're looking at these fields. So for example, if your first gift is apostle and your second gift is, let's say, evangelist, then you will probably have a weighted emphasis on the part of, I know what multiplication movements is. It's about going the gospel in. And if we do that and get critical mass, then we'll get to movement. And that's because your apostolic gifting is being seen through the lens of evangelistic. Now, the pitfalls of that is if you don't have other people on your team, or you don't appreciate the other lenses so much, or you don't kind of learn from other people outside of your lens, you could keep getting the same strengths but the same weaknesses over and over again. So you could be somebody who is apostolic evangelist, seeing lots of people, connecting with lots of people, praying with lots of people, seeing lots of people come to faith, but then if you don't then switch gears into these other fields, or even, because it's not just the fields, it's the way you are as a person and what you see and how you equip people. So if you don't have a team or you don't think in those ways, you might never get to solid multiplying churches, because you're not taking on those kind of characteristics. So if you're a strong teaching gift, you can be very strong in the discovery Bible study type stuff. So I knew a guy who was multiplying movements actually in the Birmingham area, and he was very strong at saying, we're into multiplication movements, T for T, etc. But it was always strong more on we're going to say to people, we're going to meet for Bible study, and they would do the Bible and the questions. And because he was doing that, he was attracting more people who were already Christians, and then they were doing that Bible study with the Pope of multiplying to non-believers, but they were not getting any momentum from the harvest because they didn't have this at all. So it was like really focused there. And so it's really important to not only see the tools, but see if you are weighted too much in one area all the time, and why then you're not getting a breakthrough into the next area. Some of it is not just to do with tools, it's to do with what your natural passion will lead you to do. And so there's a need to be intentional about saying, this is my natural passion, or this is my natural passion, but to see movements, I'm going to either need to shift into the next gear, or I'm going to need to shift but have people in that area that will work with me to model, because I'm not strong in that area, for example.
Peter, just explain the prophetic in field 1, what you understand.
Everybody that I've met that has more of a prophetic, either prophet or apostle and prophet second, are more aware of, say for example, finding people of peace through prayer walking. Or, that prayer is the connecting through the prayer that enables us to connect with more people faster, or to keep people faster, or God brings people to us as we pray. Well, that would be one way. If you look at most of the people of peace in the book of Acts, it came because people were in some kind of posture of prayer, and it would be like the Macedonian call, and then they go there, then they go to the place of prayer and they meet Lydia. Cornelius on the roof, Peter's on the roof, and it's like Cornelius gets the thing, and the vision comes down 3 times, and the Holy Spirit says to Peter, go with these guys who are about to come there, and so on. There's a lot of stories that came from the prayer element. So I think field 1 is about connecting with new people, or identifying what people groups or places you're going to enter. When Jesus got up in the morning to pray, the father said to him, you must go to all of the towns and villages also, right? So that came out of prayer. So often people who are prophetic can see, have an awareness of seeing people groups, or led through prayer as to what target is a target area, or through prayer walking, or through a whole range of things that actually can draw on this area. Now, because a lot of guys I've met who are not here, that's why they focus here in order to get to movements. But then it's not, because it's not targeted enough. It's just scatter but not gather.
Also, how to do it as well. People who are prophetic receive a way to do it.
Yeah.
So you go to a certain area.
Yeah, so that if that's lacking, that can be a real strength with people in the team who are more prophetic or apostolic prophetic. If then it's like that, but we're not getting any sowing, abundant sowing, then obviously we want to be moving into this. I'm not saying this from a point of view of this is to make it more complicated, or that means we throw away the tools. The tools are the basic thing, but it's to do with movements. Is not just to do with tools; it's to do with people.
Right.
And if you have you could put the tools in, but really the person is more like, if you ask them what the tool is 2 kingdoms, 3 circles, something like that if it's an evangelist. If it's a teacher, it's like, yeah, it's like in 3 thirds or what, something like that. It's these 7 commands, and they will know inside and out what the 7 commands are. But if these aspects are missing, even though the tool is there, the enthusiasm about using and training that tool won't be there. And that's why you see a lack then in that part of the movement.
Thank you, yeah.
Any thoughts or questions on that? So for me, this answers part of the question to do with team. I think in a city or region, there needs to be a team. And you can get so far with a 2, you can do the Luke 10 and get to seeing lots of people, but then in terms of seeing sustainable networks and new churches coming from the harvest, there needs to be team. And if the team only has people who have got one type of mentality, you don't get the balance that's needed. Yeah.
I'm looking back at it, but can I just clarify, when you say think groups, think households of peace, not just people of peace, imagine you get someone who, you talk to them and they just seem to have a burning desire for their family to hear this, especially if you're in a more sort of cross-cultural situation. Is there a place for training them immediately to go back and you never even meet their family?
Yes, of course.
Release them immediately.
Yes, of course.
So you're not saying you'd always want to gather the group with you, the outside?
No, I'm not saying that. It's not. It's just about how you are seeing the group. That obviously you're already immediately seeing the group because you know that you're meeting this guy and you are intentionally straight away coaching that guy to gather a group. But that's different to just going to random individuals and then say let's meet up with a coffee with then the hope that that might lead to a group. That's a different matter altogether, and you can end up you could end up with your time being on Tuesday from 3 o'clock I meet this guy in this cafe, on another day I meet this guy in this cafe, I meet another guy in this pub, and then you're doing that, but that is not necessarily getting to any groups, and you could be doing that for a year or a year and a half.
Right.
Yeah. So those are 2 key issues. One is to do with team and to do with our natural motivation. So a question that was asked just in the cars we were going around is like, what is your 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th type of APES gifting in order? In terms of like what, and everybody in this room saying their 1st is apostle, which is fine, because it is a strategy coordinator for city and regions. But secondly, it's good to know what your 2nd one is, not as a kind of theological thing where we just sit and talk and do nothing, but from the perspective of what then does that lead you to tend to do when you move out into doing this work. And then for example for me, my least possible gifting ever, nobody ever says that I'm a shepherd, which means that I could have an issue with seeing loving communities that sustain over a very long time, because if I don't allow shepherding types, even though I've got this, even though I know the tools, even though I know list the one another's, blah blah blah, I would still maybe tend towards influencing in a certain way that would lead away from that. I will always scatter. So you won't get groups because I'll always be like, we've got to go and scatter. So if I'm not aware of that even, you know, one of the key things I think for movement leaders at a city or regional level, Romans 12, is to know yourself. Do not think more highly of yourself than you ought, not less. Do we really understand who we are in terms of that, and then how that leads us to behave in what we're doing? Because if we don't do that, we can be very frustrated.